All rise.
Madam Clerk, open court.
Oyez, oyez. Silence is commanded for the justices of the Supreme Court of Kentucky while they are sitting. All those having pleas to make or causes to prosecute, draw nigh, and you shall be heard. This court is now in session. God save the Commonwealth, and God save this honorable court.
Thank you. Representative Nemus.
Scripture says, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. So let's go to the Lord in prayer. Heavenly Father, we give thanks to you who order the rising of the sun and the seasonal rhythms of life. From you comes every good gift, and before you we pause with gratitude and humility. We thank you for this nation and for the blessings of the rule of law, for a system of checks and balances, one that seeks justice over force, reason over impulse, and truth over convenience. We give thanks for those who dedicate their lives to this calling, these justices, judges across the Commonwealth, my fellow attorneys, and all public servants who labor, often unseen, to ensure that justice and order are not merely ideals, but a lived reality for our people. Today, we offer particular thanks for the life and the work of Justice Bill Graves. Thank you for his long and faithful service, for a career marked by wisdom, steadiness, and fidelity to the law. Thank you for the example he has set as a public servant who has run and is still running his race with honor, as a devoted family man, and as a friend whose counsel and kindness have blessed so many, including me. May Justice Graves' legacy that we unveil today be not only painted on canvas, but imprinted on the lives he has touched and the institutions he has strengthened. We pray now for our nation. We ask you to heal what is divided, to strengthen what is good, to give us minds humble enough to listen to and to learn from one another, and for courage enough to stand for law, even when it is costly. Remind us, O God, that though we may disagree, we are not enemies, and that even in our division, we are stronger together. And remind us that unity does not require uniformity, but it does require charity. Charity for our families, charity for our friends, charity for our countrymen, and no less charity for the stranger. May all we do bring honor to you and blessing to the land we love. We ask these things in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen.
I pledge allegiance
To the flag.
to the flag
of the United States of America, and
to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, With liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. You may be seated. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this lovely sunny day in Frankfort. We're glad to have you here. And on behalf of the court, I want to welcome you to this dedication of the portrait of Justice Graves. We are obviously not in the Capitol, as you know by now. We are temporarily in other quarters, and the portrait that's being dedicated today will be housed at our temporary quarters until it can be housed at the Capitol. And hopefully that is sooner rather than later. I wanted to welcome Justice Graves' wife, Marianne. Good to see you again. And his son, Kevin, is also here today. Thank you. And on behalf of the court, I would like to ask I think Justice Nickel is going to start us off with some remarks.
Thank you, Chief Justice. On behalf of the citizens of the 23 County First Appellate District, which Justice Graves and I both have had the pleasure of representing on this court, I congratulate him upon receiving the high honor of having his portrait permanently displayed in our state capitol among so many other impressive and revered jurists who each faithfully, sacrificially, and fully offered their public service, analytical minds, impartial judgments, and well-articulated opinions to the people of this great Commonwealth and to the sacred causes of due process and judicial independence with liberty and justice for all. Justice Graves, I personally thank you for your many kindnesses bestowed to me over the many years, including the gift of your mentorship, which helped me become a better attorney. The gift of your judicial example, which demonstrated to me the importance of diligence, fairness, and integrity. And the gift of your friendship, which revealed to me the transformational power of kindness, encouragement, and loyalty. To you and your wife, Marianne, and to your sons, I bid you all welcome. As you know, over the years, I've often been called upon to lift a song to commemorate a particular occasion, most typically offering up our national anthem or our state song. But for today's august affair, I thought it most appropriate if I shared with our audience, both here and statewide, another popular song from our region in far western Kentucky. Vote J.W. Bill Graves for his qualifications. Vote J.W. Bill Graves for his experience. Vote J.W. Bill Graves for his qualifications. Vote J.W. Bill Graves for Kentucky Supreme Court Justice. Whenever your name is mentioned to a generation of voters from the First Appellate District, the first memory happily brought to their collective minds is the foregoing catchy, folksy, homespun political jingle you relied on heavily over local radio and television airwaves to carry you to successive campaign victories as a district judge, circuit judge, and ultimately the Supreme Court of Kentucky. It is noteworthy that upon your retirement from this court in 2006, you continued to serve our Commonwealth as a special judge on the Court of Appeals, where I had the pleasure of serving beside you on several panels. Thus, you are one of only a very few Kentucky jurists who served at all four levels of our modern judiciary and also served as a local justice of the peace and trial commissioner, in addition to your valued military service, Colonel. Born in Paducah in 1935, you graduated from St. Mary High School prior to obtaining your undergraduate degree at Notre Dame University in 1957 and your law degree from the University of Kentucky College of Law. And after graduation and prior to returning home to practice, you benefited from serving as a young clerk for the Commonwealth's highest court. The notable success we celebrate today is founded upon your lifetime of heartfelt, diligent, and humble public service. Your life serves us all as an example of one who has lived out the Lord's greatest commandment, the greatest law, if you will, as announced in the Christian New Testament, to love your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind, and to love your neighbor as yourself. The great Greek philosopher Socrates once aptly described the essential qualities of a good judge and justice when he said 4 things belong to a judge: to hear courteously, to answer wisely, to consider soberly, and to decide impartially. Justice Graves not only possessed and demonstrated these laudable qualities during his professional tenure, he dedicated these skills throughout his life in seeking to improve the lives of others. To borrow from the book of Amos, when Justice Graves donned his judicial robe and ascended to the bench, he let justice roll down like waters and righteousness like an ever-flowing stream. Earlier in your judicial career, newspaper articles, and I noticed that we have Bill Bartleman here with the former reporter for the Paducah Sun for his many years of service. Thank you, Bill. But in early newspaper articles, described you as a firm but friendly and fair, no frills, and somewhat eccentric trial judge. It was said that you often made your point in a somewhat mischievous manner, such as the time you dispatched a bailiff to silence a contemptuous lawnmower being operated too close to the open window of your non-air-conditioned courtroom, making it difficult for the jury to hear testimony. And on another occasion, when your small, inadequate courtroom was jammed tightly with attorneys attending a busy motion docket, you recessed court long enough for everyone to regather outside in front of the McCracken County Courthouse on their steps to argue their cases, while underscoring the need for a new courthouse space in which to provide justice to the people. Interestingly, a newspaper photograph depicting you holding court on that day also included an enthusiastic young attorney ardently arguing his case before you. That young attorney was none other than myself. Who would have thought, Justice Graves, that you would rise to serve on the Supreme Court along with that young attorney? And it's my honor to call you my friend and my colleague today. Today, I'm glad to add my voice to the loud chorus raised by those many grateful citizens of our Commonwealth and by its attorneys and judges in praising you for your faithful, dependable, and exemplary commitment to the cause of justice and the rule of law as an independent, thoughtful, and courageous trial court judge and Supreme Court justice. On this important public occasion, we should all remember that portraits do more than simply honor an individual's accomplishments and capture their transient image for posterity. They also invite inquiry and, in the proper case, inspire imitation and offer hope. Through their artistry, portraits can convey one's story, celebrate one's existence, communicate one's philosophy, suggest one's character, and preserves one's relevancy. In this sense, portraits take on a life of their own, having an impact long after the subject can speak no more. I would be remiss today if I did not also pause to express this Commonwealth's deep appreciation to the artist who produced this impressive portrait, Fred Biggs of Mayfield in Graves County, Kentucky. Mr. Biggs, thank you for donating your artistic skill toward completion of this portrait of one of Kentucky's finest jurists. Your work will now hang in the hallowed judicial halls of our state capitol for as long as there is an old Kentucky home. Your use of bright and warm colors to depict Justice Graves reminds me of his immense intellect and friendly demeanor. Most would honestly admit that he was always among the brightest minds gathered within any conference room or seated upon any bench. It is my belief that your portrait of our friend Justice Bill Graves captures not only his likeness, but also his essence, and will serve in coming years as a distant beacon beckoning others to share in his vision, follow in his footsteps, and to serve in his manner. Congratulations, Justice Graves. And in the words of Matthew chapter 25, verse 21, well done, thy good and faithful servant. Well done, my friend.
All right. Bill, my daddy said that the older you get, the fewer people come to your funeral. Well, look at this. Look at this crowd. You're 90 years old. You retired in 2006. This demonstrates the wide swath of your influence on our society. We're old friends. I wish I could tell some wild stories about all those trips we took, but we didn't do anything wild. But anyway, you're 90. You're my mentor. I want to be just like you when I'm 90. Thank you so much today. And I'd like to thank Shay Nickel. He's the prime mover of getting this portrait made. Thank you.
Thank you. Secretary Adams, Mr. Atkins, esteemed members of the bench and bar, and honored guest, Justice Graves, Mrs. Graves. It's an honor to speak for just a minute. First, I'd like to say from a personal place, Justice Graves, thank you so much for the mentorship you showed me as a baby new judge on the Court of Appeals and the friendship that you bestowed on me over the years. You were, after retirement, coming back into service, did not need to take new problems under your wings. And I'm so happy that you did. I'm so looking forward to the remarks that we're going to hear in just a minute. And as I've said many times, if it weren't for the mentorship that I received from then Chief Judge Combs and you and others sitting on our court, it shaped my career forever. Thank you very much. I think we became friends in the beginning over a couple of mutual things, our faith that we shared. I happened to mention that my daughter at the time, who was a competitive Irish dancer, was considering, with all due respect, as we call it in Northern Kentucky, Notre Dame, not Notre Dame. And I think that helped forge me in friendship with Justice Graves. So he kept up with Olivia's college choice, and alas, she chose another esteemed institution, Center College, here closer to home. But she's never forgotten the interest that you took in her career and my career. Thank you very much. The other thing you need to know about this gentleman is he doesn't forget a friend. In the days where we can barely shoot off a text message to convey our most important thoughts, Bill Graves has taken the time to write me on numerous occasions. Every time I faced an opponent, every time I won a race, every time I issued maybe an opinion or two he thought something about, I heard from Justice Graves, and that has meant so much to me over the years. I'm so privileged to be a part of this court and to be able to sit today and watch the unveiling of your portrait and listen to people that I hold in the highest regard, you certainly among them. You deserve this day of recognition, especially among your fellow Western Kentuckians. They've traveled a long way to come here and share this joy with you. And I'm happy to be a part of it and to offer on behalf of my family and I our heartfelt congratulations and thanks for your service, not only to the Commonwealth, many years on the bench, that's already been noted, but also, as I think Justice Nickel noted, to our country in your esteemed and long military service. You are a true public servant, and I appreciate just being here today with you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And now we will hear from Judge Sarah Combs.
Chivalry is not dead. Thank you so much. Well, I will begin by alleviating any fear you may have that I will not inflict my terrible singing voice upon you. I would not want to compete even if I were good, but since I have no voice whatsoever, thank you so much, Justice Nichols, for honoring us with that rendition of a great political ad. Great tradition that I think we should resurrect instead of some of the acrimony that we hear these days. It would be a great relief and a breath of fresh air. This is a happy day. It's not often that we gather in a courtroom for a happy occasion. Most of the time, it's solemn, it's serious, it's unpleasant. It has a bad taste for many people. At least 50% of the litigants pass away from a courtroom like this very unhappy. But today we gather for a happy occasion. And I'm so pleased. I'm going to have a hard time referring to my friend as Justice Graves. I'm so pleased that that Bill asked me to do this today, because I esteemed him very highly when he was on the Supreme Court and never dreamed that I'd ever get to know him personally. He was one of the panel that we all revered as we revere his successors. But long about, let's see, I think it was December 31st, 2006, his term was to end. I have a file on all of you, and it's a file of thank you notes and letters and Christmas cards. It's not a file of anything in any way fearsome or ugly, but it's a little bit of a record. So when he asked me to make this talk today, I pulled out my Bill Graves file, and I found a wonderful series of correspondence where he let me know from that day forward that he wanted to come to the Court of Appeals. And what I would like to emphasize, to fill in a few gaps, this is a man, very smart man. His degree from Notre Dame is in chemistry. That's one gap I'd like to fill in, because I don't know any dummy who ever majored in chemistry. So he never really praised himself at all. This just happened to be part of a resume that I laid hands on. So then he had a military career with the Army Reserve, district judge in McCracken County, circuit judge in McCracken County, and then, thanks to that great political ad, the Supreme Court of Kentucky. Who goes from the Supreme Court back down to the Court of Appeals? It was my great pleasure to serve with 5 of the members of this court when they were on the Court of Appeals. That was a natural progression. Court of Appeals, Supreme Court. But Justice Graves, when he saw that his time was running out in legal service, decided one more adventure was appropriate. And he started writing letters, and I want you to note the chronology of this. He was to retire December 31st, 2006. February the 6th of the next year, 2007, some 6 weeks later, he wanted to come to the Court of Appeals, couldn't stand being unemployed, not in the service of the law. I don't know if Marianne had a hand in that, knowing that he would be underfoot or not. I suspect that could have been a factor, but that was never articulated anywhere. So along he came to the Court of Appeals and stayed until March of 2010. And we worked together that entire time. That was a period of time when I was serving as the chief judge of our court, and we were in great transition with new judges coming on and lots of change going on. But he came and lent an air of stability and equanimity and congeniality, along with the legal knowledge. I would like to emphasize that aspect of this lovely man. It was his touch of graciousness with the human race that I think set him apart from many of his colleagues and peers, and to this day will set him apart always in our memory. He has the human touch. He cares about people. He makes the law a servant of people, not the master, not the rod that punishes, but the tool that gives hope. That was always his approach to the law. One of the things I loved about him as well, I believe that Justice Nichols mentioned his time as law clerk to the Supreme Court of Kentucky, back when it was the old Court of Appeals. He won his way to my heart when he came up to me and told me about his role as a young man having lunch at the old Court of Appeals, today's Supreme Court, when the governor of Kentucky came up from the first floor to have lunch and talk to his buddies and his colleagues, and picked up conversation after conversation with young Bill Graves. And that man happened to be my later to be and now my late husband, Bert Combs. And so they were friends and colleagues back when he was a new young lawyer. Justice, he mentored Justice Nichols. It's funny how the continuity goes on. One word, I've got to stop because I don't want to be one of those long-winded speakers today. But he had this gift for touching people where you least expect it. For instance, who would guess that far western Kentucky and far eastern Kentucky would be united during his tenure on the court? His good friend, Justice Will T. Scott, was a frequent person he visited in eastern Kentucky, and he would go to Pikeville to visit Justice Scott. He'd stop in Stanton at my office, and he would say, "That cat you have, Sarah, you have a cat with two paws that are sort of alike. What's its name?" And I said, "It's Tommy Two Socks." He said, "What is it with you people in eastern Kentucky?" I said, "What are you talking about?" He said, "Will T has dogs and he calls them two sockers as well. Is it a two socks thing for the mountains or what?" But anyway, nothing passed his scrutiny. He managed to unite that old expression, east is east and west is west, and never the twain shall meet. They did, and they do with Bill Graves, because he has a way of bringing people together. I know that another adventure lies ahead. That is his nature. When he left the Court of Appeals, he did not retire. Maybe Mary Ann spoke again, I'm not sure. But he set up a law practice in Paducah and would call me frequently, and we would continue to have the wonderful conversations that we had when we had become friends on the Court of Appeals. He has served us well, and he has loved us even better. I think we owe him not just a portrait, but a tremendous debt of gratitude today. I'd like to close with the words of the Hobbit. Tolkien reminded us that the greatest adventure is the one that is yet to be. I have a feeling, I predict, there's another venture that lies just around the corner for our good friend, Justice Bill Graves, and thank you all for being here to honor him. It's our pleasure to do that today, and my honor to be able to articulate some of the good feelings I have about this dear friend. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you, Judge Combs. Chief Justice Lambert.
Sure. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. May it please the court. And my first thought in looking at this crowd is, what a crowd. This speaks to the many, many friends that Bill Graves has acquired through the years. We're here to celebrate the judicial career of Justice John William Graves. Now, when I say that, addressing our honored guest is not always an easy task. He's been known as Judge Graves, Bill Graves, Colonel Graves, and from time to time, he changes his name. He goes from J. William Graves over to John W. Graves. Never quite understood that. Once upon a time, or maybe on more than one occasion, I've had the occasion to see Bill and say, "Hello, Bill, how are you today?" And have him answer, "That's Justice Graves to you, sir." And I always correct myself and say, "Yes, Justice Graves." You know, Bill has been known for many things. He's been called on occasion, stingy or parsimonious or penurious. He's never been known to pass up a free buffet. And he's always been known to stop over at Fort Knox and spend the night on his way from Paducah to Frankfort. Reasoning, of course, that the lodging rates at Fort Knox were reasonable, particularly for a colonel. And by the way, that was another of his many titles. But whenever I pointed that out to him, that from time to time, Bill, you're a little bit stingy, he would say, "No, sir, I'm thrifty." I always liked that term, thrifty, and that characterized him well. I think back on the time that Bill and I spent together on the Supreme Court. I remember him as always being well-prepared, thoughtful, open-minded, willing to change his mind from time to time if it called for that, if the case called for that. He listened in the conference room. He listened patiently to his colleagues, asked appropriate questions, and was just and a man, incidentally, whose integrity was never, ever, ever questioned whatsoever. A man of consummate integrity and ability, as Judge Combs so appropriately said a moment ago. He was a grand ideal of a judge, and particularly of an appellate judge. I do want to correct one thought, however, or one rumor, perhaps. On occasion, Justice Graves, while listening to oral argument at the bench, would cock his head in a peculiar fashion, and his eyes would close. Now, I want to set the record straight. Bill was not sleeping on those occasions. He was listening, and that was his preferred way of listening, to close his eyes with his head slightly cocked and listen to the arguments that the lawyers made. Among other things, Bill has always been a great supporter of Notre Dame sports, particularly Notre Dame football. Once upon a time, he invited my son, Joseph, to go to a Notre Dame game with him. Joseph went. He was then about 13 or 14. Joseph went. Marianne and Bill took good care of him, and so forth. But among the guests there that day in Bill's group were Phil and Marlo Donahue. Well, Joseph came home a day or so later. First thing you know, he was talking about Phil and Marlo as if they were friends. Friends forever, Phil and Marlo. And when I mentioned that, Bill was a member of a group of college-age friends. College-age friends who remained close. Now, it's rare. We all have college friends and law school friends and so forth, but we tend to drift apart and lose touch entirely. Not Bill Graves and not his friends, which I believe you referred to, Bill, as the gang. Is that right? As the gang. This group of 5 or 6 men who started as young men in college, they grew old together, but they never lost touch. They met with one another a time or two a year, but their friendship was always seemed like it was new. And I admire that very much, in the ability of those men to keep in touch the way they did. Phil Donahue, whom I mentioned a moment ago, was one of that group, the gang. And I remember vividly on the day that Bill was sworn in as a justice of the Supreme Court. Now, word came, oh, perhaps a day or two ahead of time, that Phil Donahue was going to be there. Fortunately, I was not Chief Justice at the time. Bob Stevens was. So this was not my problem to deal with. It was Bob's problem to deal with. At any rate, Phil shows up, being every bit of Phil Donahue, just who you would expect to show up, and immediately takes over. It was as if he was running his television show, you know? And word came to Bob again that Phil Donahue wanted to sit at council table. Now that's an irregular thing. That council table, when the court is in session, is for members of the bar and people who have something to do with the proceeding. Now, Phil was going to speak, and that was, of course, quite appropriate. But Bob said, I remember hearing Bob saying, well, I don't much like it, but the hell with it. Let's just let it go. And so Phil sat at council table that day. At any rate, that was a great occasion for Bill to have his good friend and I think perhaps there were other members of the gang, Mary Ann shaking her head yes, and that one thing I failed to note in my remarks was the closeness I observed through the years between Bill and Mary Ann and Tony and Kevin. If there was ever a man who was a great family man, a man who was always there, always willing, always wanting to help his children through life's ups and downs, it was Bill Graves, a wonderful father and a wonderful husband. Now, I had planned to do something. It didn't occur to me that someone else, Justice Nickel, would do the same thing, because I too know the Bill Graves campaign song. And I even rehearsed it last night in the quiet of my home. So I was going to sing that today, and let everybody have a good laugh. But I guess I've been upstaged on that, and that's entirely because Shay did it ever so well. And of course, he was up close and personal with Bill at that phase of his life. And anyway, a story, however, that I've always remembered, whether it's true or not, I don't know. I make no affidavit for the truth of it, except to say that it's a good story. The story is that the Bill Graves jingle had been playing constantly. And incidentally, that song that Shay sang is a bit of a mind worm. It gets in your head and you can't get it out of your head, you know? It just sticks there. So on election day, the story goes, a young woman came to vote. She had with her a 3 or 4-year-old who was troublesome, as those children that age can be. And this little fellow was singing the song, vote J.W. Bill Graves for his qualifications. And everybody in the room, election officers and other voters and so forth, heard that child singing and broke out laughing. That was the kind of jingle that Justice Graves used in his campaign. My personal friendship with Bill Graves has been long and rewarding. He was one of those colleagues that with whom you had a professional relationship, of course, but also a personal friendship. You knew when you saw him, you could say and be confident in saying, that is my friend there. Never, ever a thought of anything other than goodwill, appropriate behavior, and good thoughts. You always knew that from Bill, you would have good thoughts, good questions, sound legal doctrine being expressed. And one of the rich phases, features of my life has been my friendship with today's honored guest. Bill, it's been great being with you. It's been a good ride, and we've got a few more trips to take. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Shepherd, you would come forward, please.
Good afternoon to everybody, and may it please the court. Justice Graves, I'm a little bit behind him on that 90 years, but I'm pretty close. And we've been friends for right in around 60 years now. And when he called me a week ago and asked me if I would make some remarks at this dedication, he said, Chief Justice Derek Lambert will be there. Chief Justice retired Joseph Lambert will be there, and Judge Sarah Combs will be there. I said, well, Justice Graves, I don't need to be now making some kind of remarks with that type of crowds. I said, I feel like George Goebel at the Tonight Show with Johnny Carson years ago. When George Goebel was introduced, he came out to be seated, and he was sitting next to Frank Sinatra and Bob Hope. And he said to Johnny, he said, I feel like, a brown shoe sitting here between two tuxedos. Well, I told the judge, I said, I'd be the brown shoe up there with tuxedos. You don't need me there. And so I thought that was the end of it. And then when I came here today, he handed me the program down here and said, you're on the program, and you are going to be making a speech. So I bet there's never a justice on our Supreme Court that's been as unusual as Justice William Graves. I love him. I've loved him those 60 years. My first introduction was unusual. I was in Henderson office with John Stanley Hoffman, who was a great friend of mine and a great lawyer. He was environmental secretary for years. And he told me, he said, I've got my best friend from law school is going to be in Henderson, and we're going to have lunch with us. So I was in court, and I came back to the office, and I said, where is he? And John Stanley said, he's in the library. And we walk in the library, and Justice Graves is lying on the floor, asleep in the library. And he had a Henderson telephone directory over his chest. And so we woke him up and asked him why he had the telephone directory. And he said, when I go to any town in Kentucky outside of Paducah, I always read the telephone directory. That might be a call for all of us. I saw him a little bit as a lawyer. He was an unusual lawyer as well. I was in a workers' compensation. He had up in Owensboro, Kentucky, and there was an orthopedic surgeon there who spoke for the defense in all comp cases, always for the defendant. And so he had all the depositions were taken in his library in Owensboro. And Justice Graves asked him, he said, no, we're taking this deposition in your library. Yes. And he said, you do some research on some of your cases? Oh, yes, I do. Graves took his camera out of his briefcase and took a picture of the doctor's library, and there were only 3 books on the shelves. And he said, I'm introducing this as an exhibit to this deposition to show about all the medical research you do out of your library. As a judge, when he was in Paducah, I had only one case with him, a medical malpractice case before him, and he was a great judge to practice before. He tried to take better care of Paducah lawyers. And any lawyer from Paducah, from Louisville or Lexington, who got a case in his court, they would learn the first time they ever called to do something by phone, the word to them was, if you got a case filed in the McCracken Circuit Court, you're going to have to drive all the way down here. So that kept some Louisville and Lexington lawyers out of Paducah and back with Paducah attorneys. I've met him. I've been a Notre Dame football fan since I was in the 3rd grade because we lived in Mishawaka, Indiana, when I was in the 3rd, 4th, and 5th grades. So I got to know him real fast. 60 years ago, even he could always get you tickets to a Notre Dame game. Now that's the kind of friend. And so on two of those trips, he invited me to be along with the gang that Chief Justice Lambert made reference to. And I got to be at the 2 games in Notre Dame with Phil Donahue and Justice Graves, old friend from college days at Notre Dame. Mr. Donahue on one occasion pulled me aside and said, "I'm tell you something about Graves that I bet you all don't know in Kentucky." He said, we had a nickname for him up here. Up here, we called him Bear. So I said, we don't call him the Bear in Justice, but we call him Judge. But when Justice Graves was introduced and was sworn in here with at the Supreme Court, Justice as Phil Donahue did come for that occasion. And on that same day, Steve Beshear was having a press conference downstairs on the first level because he was either, I think, announcing for either the Senate or governor. I think it was Senate. But not many of the media would be around for Steve's introductions because they were all up on the 3rd floor watching Phil Donahue and Justice Graves. And I bet this has never happened with any other justice on the Supreme Court. When Justice Graves was sworn in, the picture of Justice Graves in the Lexington Herald-Leader was not the picture of just Justice Graves. It was a picture of Phil Donahue taking a picture of Justice Graves, and that was the picture in the Lexington paper about the story. He's a great guy. He's a great friend to have. Never forget him. I've always admired him as a circuit judge, as a justice on the Supreme Court. I spent 4 years in the Army, so I have so much honor too for military officers. And I honor him so much because he's also a full colonel in the Army. So Justice Graves, thank you for your career as a judge, as a justice, and as a full colonel in the United States Army. And very best to you. Thank you very much.
Mr. Biggs, if you would, please.
I would like to start by saying thank you to the Graves family. Thank you to Justice Graves and to Justice Nickel and the members of the court for coordinating and putting this on. I am just a farm boy from Wheel, Kentucky. Grew up on a farm that was the birthplace of the Vice President of the United States. Attended the same school that the Vice President of the United States attended. Went to the neighborhood picnic, Fancy Farm, that the Vice President spoke at many times as the keynote speaker. For me personally, this is very humbling to be able to be a part of any of this for Justice Bill Graves. People ask me, is it hard to paint people? And it's not. two legs, two arms, a head and a body to hook it all together. It is hard, extremely hard to paint a person. You have to get the personality, the spirit, the pizzazz on a canvas, and that sometimes can be difficult. With Justice Graves, it's obvious that he never played center for Notre Dame basketball team. But he is always a man that was looked up to. He's always a man that stood out in the crowd. He was always a man that had a unique brightness to him. I wanted to put that on canvas. I wanted this to be a canvas that when you looked across, that one's a little unique. It's a little brighter because that's the man. And in conclusion, I again want to thank the Graves family and Justice Graves, Justice Nickel, and the members of the court for having me here. Thank you.
I think we're ready to hear from the guest of honor, Justice Graves. Oh, I'm sorry. That's right. I apologize. Presentation of the portrait. You are right. You are correct. I was about to apologize to you because you've asked us to have a very simple ceremony and your friends and family have made it extra special, but we will be happy to have Mary Ann and the family come forward to unveil the portrait. Thank you. Now, Justice Graves, thank you very much.
Oh, goodness. Thank you. First of all, Madam Chief Justice, you've been a friend since '96. We've corresponded informally by text for this, and you said I could speak as long as I wanted to. And I want to know if you still have 4 votes. Oh, I know from experience that events that go this well do not happen spontaneously. It takes a lot of work and preparation. And I'm eternally thankful to Katie Biggs and Hannah Walker and Jamie Niels for the work they've done to make this go so smoothly. And were I still in the Army, I would recommend them for promotion ahead of their peers. We all drink from wells that others have dug, and I would be remiss if I did not acknowledge people who have helped me get along this way, my family, my wife, Mary Ann, my children, my educators, and especially Jason Nemes and Shane Nickel and Fred Biggs in getting this portrait done. I've studied a lot of theology and I went through a time of life when I thought Jehovah's Witnesses were correct about graven images. And that's why it took me 20 years. But at any rate, one time Jason told me I better get on it because a kick in the butt is forward motion. My experience with the court really starts in 1955 when my mother won a case and opinion written by Porter Sims getting additional child support so I could get to college. In 1960, I was a student at the University of Kentucky looking for a place to live, and I was introduced to a very personable young attorney at Miller, Marks and Griffin. his name was Bob Stevens, and Bob was very nice and active, and he said he had been to law school, and if you want to learn the law, be a clerk for the Supreme Court. But Bob gave me a nice place to live at a good rate, and he taught me some law. Before I ever started law school, he said, "You boys can do anything you want in that court, in that apartment, as long as I have a parking spot for UK athletic events." And so Bob taught me what a reservation of rights was when you do a real estate transaction. Bob and I stayed friends through the years. He ran for Attorney General in 75, and I supported him, and then he got on the court, and Julian Gabbard ran against him, and I supported him, and Bob and I would talk about on the phone, and we mostly talked about Notre Dame football or UK basketball, but like me, both Notre Dame and UK have seen better days. At any rate, Bob told me that there were fringes. He says, one thing, you don't want to use your own car, you want to have that Ford Crown Victoria, and it was a wonderful car. It would scoot, and they told me it had a police interceptor in that motor, and I really did not know that a police interceptor meant the police would intercept you when you were speeding. One time I was following Senator Leeper home, and we're in Hopkins County, and there was a blue light behind me, and I pulled over, and Senator Leeper kept on going. The officer came up, tapped on the window. He looked at my license. He looked at me and said, "Hell, I know you. I voted for you." He said, "A police officer can have discretion just like a judge can. Have a good day." One night I was on coming up on the Bluegrass Parkway, and it was pretty late, and I was going fast, and they even had a navigational aid called a radar detector. But all of a sudden, there were blue lights behind me, and he stayed back there a long time. And I was cringing. I said, "I'm going to get chewed out." So he comes up and taps on the window and said, "Sir, I know who you are, where you're going. Please slow down on 127th. So when you travel, you want to know how many miles per gallon and how many miles behind for plumbing, especially when you get to be an elderly man. And for a long time, the rest stop at Beaver Dam was closed, so I had an emergency, and I pulled off on the side exit and used the military principle of cover and concealment, went over on the right and opened both doors. And behind me comes a state trooper. And he says, "Sir, can I help you?" And I thought, I wish you could. But at any rate, I said, I have to empty a bladder. He says, "Well, nothing wrong with that. Carry on, sir." But a lot of time's been consumed. We have a large audience here, and I know that means you have a good caterer. And I do have to defend a couple of things. Justice Lambert commented about going from J. William to John W., and that's what you do when creditors are after you. Ron Sheffer told a story about my sleeping under the library table, and it is true. I practiced workers' comp law, and there was a neurosurgeon at Evansville that gave depositions at 6 o'clock in the morning. So that meant you had to leave Paducah at 2 o'clock in the morning, and you'd go take that deposition at 8 o'clock. And I was meeting John and Ron for lunch, and they told me to wait in the library, and I'd gotten up at 4 o'clock, and so it was time to take a nap. And you never, some people say, never let something go by, but I really learned to love the law and the responsibilities and blessings of being a judge from working for the 1963 Court of Appeals. It was a special time, and I know in 1952, we had 5 Democrat presidents, and the campaign for Adlai Stevenson was, "You've never had it so good." Well, I don't think the Court of Appeals and judges have ever had it so good as in 1963. What made this time very special was Burt Combs was the governor. He had been on the court. He maintained cordial relations with the court over the years. He would come up and have coffee and talk to the law clerks and those of us that went to UK. He would tell us what we learned from Rory Moreland about criminal procedure and winning a criminal case on the Fourth or Fifth Amendment would serve us a lot better than what we learned from Paul Ehrbost, who taught constitutional law and believed in a living constitution. And Moreland was unpopular and Ehrbost was popular among the students, but time proved Burt Combs right. And then when it was time to do the budget, you will appreciate this. Astor Hogg, the court administrator, said to John Palmore, "John, what are you doing Thursday morning?" John said, "I'm available." He says, "Well, we got to go down to the first floor and talk to Burt about the budget." So, and when Governor Combs needed a staff attorney, he called Astor Hogg and said, "Send me a lawyer." And that's how Julius Rather became a partner of Burt Combs. But at that time, we had 4 commissioners who were very, very good students of the law. They wrote good opinions. They were Watson Clay on the civil rules, Bob Cullen, reviser of statutes, and Osso Stanley. And Osso Stanley was an amazing man. He was proof that you could be a good judge without going to law school. He had never been to law school, but he wrote wonderful opinions. And in Judge Palmore's book, he could write an opinion where it was either reversing or affirming by changing one sentence in the last page. And also Stanley was also, he wanted to be a judge. So periodically he would resign from the court and run against the judge in the 3rd district, lose the election, and they would hire him back. Then Judge Stanley died in November when I was on the court, and he was replaced by Bernard Davis. And there is politics through life. And Bernard Davis and Morris Montgomery on the court, they had gone to law school together at Washington and Lee. And Bernard wanted to run for the court, and Montgomery made a deal with him that if you don't run against me, you'll get to be a commissioner. And Burt Combs mentioned in there that really worked well, said Bernard Davis it worked out well. Bernard Davis liked to drink and party, but he could write twice as many opinions as anybody else. But that one year in Frankfort was very helpful. St. Thomas Aquinas said that men were inclined towards virtue, and James Madison in the Federalist Papers said if we had angels, men were angels, we wouldn't need government. And when I was on the clerking for the court, I observed that men were not angels and we need government. I need to say a couple of things here. Justice Michelle Keller, I know you're a special lady because I first met you in 1998 when my good friend Phil Tolliver was having a fundraiser. And you were there and a generous contributor. But at any rate, time goes on. I learned a lot from Judge Palmore. He said he was not conservative or liberal, but an evolutionist. He said that The law is not what is written in the books, it is what the judges say it is. And that is sort of an adaptation of Holmes, as that life of the law is experience, not logic. And the press said John Palmore was profane, but John Palmore was just ahead of his time in using well-articulated expletives to get his point across. He did have a very practical solution for sovereign immunity. He said that they should buy insurance like anybody else. And when I was on the court, we did have problems understanding sovereign immunity. And one time we even considered commissioning the Kentucky Law Journal to write an article on sovereign immunity to see if it would get 4 votes. But this, we've had a lot of speakers, and time has gone on. I will cut my remarks short, but tell you a little bit about politics and judicial elections. In 1982, before that, I practiced workers' comp law, and I had occasion to come before the court from time to time. And one time, the appellant was West Vaco, who was in Ballard County. Judge Clayton was on the court, and my opponent was a very formal person, very good lawyer, but he told the court to fully understand and appreciate his arguments, they would have to accept some postulates. And Boyce Clayton said, now Ballard County is where they have good duck hunting. And the lawyer said, this case is much more important than duck hunting. Justice Palmore said, don't bet on it. But at any rate, in 1982, I had a case before the court, and it was over a $300 chiropractor bill. And the issue was whether chiropractic services would be available after they became compensable under workers' comp for injuries that happened before. And this meant a lot of money to the chiropractors and to the insurance industry. But at oral argument, I don't know what was wrong, but Justice O'Hara gave me the worst time I'd ever had. And I thought if I was going to purgatory, I'd already been there. But at any rate, I think he had something against chiropractors, but he wrote a dissent that Justice Palmore wrote a concurrence, said there's no need to be vindictive. But the rest of the story is I got back to Paducah, and my classmate Phil Tolliver called me and said, you think you could get the chiropractors to support my good friend, Judge Wintersheimer, who is running against Justice O'Hara. And you know, the rest is history. And we have had some mention of Phil Donahue here. And once I became a judge, I was always referred to as an obscure judge from Paducah. And he always referred to Mary Ann as the long-suffering Mary Ann. But one thing about being a circuit judge and appellate judge, I went from district court to circuit court. And the first thing I had was a big, thick file, and I had a professor from Louisville saying it was the maker of a note was a maker, had a professor from UK saying it was an accommodation party. And the file was that thick. And I was at a judges conference. I was talking to Bill McAnulty. I said, I should have stayed as district judge. I'm in water over my head. And I told him that. He says, Bill, what you do is you give one side a summary judgment and let the Court of Appeals tell you the law. So, I do want to mention Justice Wintersheimer. I learned a lot from him. I got additional lessons in love of the law, but Justice Wintersheimer bought his clothes at Brooks Brothers. He dressed like a page from Esquire magazine, and he could politic in the most disarming manner. One morning at the Capitol Plaza, I was having breakfast with 6 realtors from Paducah, and Justice Wintersheimer enjoyed us. At the end of that breakfast, Justice Wintersheimer had 6 votes and I had none. But Justice Wintersheimer led from behind. In 1997, we had an execution of Harold McQueen, and that was a sober occasion. And I think the execution was late in the evening, and Justice Stevens had us all up there, and Cooper and Johnstone and I and Wintersheimer were going to eat at Jim's Fish Market. And we got there early before Justice Wintersheimer. We ordered our entree and beverage, which was iced tea. Justice Wintersheimer came up and he ordered his entree and said he would have a beer. And in unison, Cooper, Johnstone, and Graves said, change ours to a beer. So that's how he led from behind. But I think one thing I did was nice being about the court. Justice Jim Keller and I enjoyed country western music, and we'd always try to get a line or two in an opinion, and sometimes it worked, and sometimes it didn't. And I was thinking about doing this, and I like that country western song. I'm not as good as I once was. Well, for once, I'm as good as I ever was. I said, well, I'll get up there and show them I'm as good as I ever was. But the next song was the Beatles, which was Yesterday, and where it says, I'm not half the man I used to be. So you're getting what's left over of me. At any rate, it's time for me to sit down and shut up. And like Justice Wintersheimer always said, rejoice and be glad. He quoted Psalms. This is the day the Lord has made, and this is the day the Lord has made, and I'm going to rejoice and be glad and sit down. And thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Justice Graves. We are all honored to be here today, and I think we all agree that what is left is more than enough. I mean, you are a delightful gentleman to be with us today, and let the artist honor you in such a way. Madam Clerk?
All rise.